5 o'clock here in Minnesota. So I am Krista with the International Wolf Center, and thank you so much for joining us tonight. We are really excited to have Brenna Cassidy with us to talk about the wolf restoration journey in Colorado. And all of you who have joined us early, we did the Good Minnesota thing, and we all talked about the weather.
And the bugs. And the bugs.
Yes, that you are surviving whatever weather has come your way from wherever you are joining us. But just a reminder that this webinar is being recorded, so you will be receiving the link to the recording within about a week, and so that will get emailed to you. And I am going to turn it over to Grant, the Executive Director for the International Wolf Center, to do a little bit more of an introduction for Brenna.
All right, thanks, Krista. Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight. I'm very excited about this evening. I know many of you have been asking for updates on what's going on in Colorado, and I've been following, of course, social media and the different press releases from what's going on with the Colorado Parks and Wildlife with the reintroduction. But today we get to hear it right from the wolf monitoring expert for the state. And I'm really thrilled to have Brenna Cassidy here. Just a little bio, and then we'll get to the good stuff. So Brenna has a degree in wildlife ecology from the University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point. And she is very, very close to getting her PhD from the University of Montana, where she has been focusing on the survival and reproduction of gray wolves in Yellowstone National Park. Before coming to Colorado Parks and Wildlife, I liked how you wrote this in your bio. You spent years seasonally migrating between the bird program and the wolf project at Yellowstone National Park. And in between all of these different things, when you have a little bit of spare time, Brenna says she can be found in her pottery studio. So I think that's a nice side project for you. But thanks so much, Brenna, for joining us, and we're looking forward to hearing your talk.
Great, thanks so much. Yeah, just as a real quick introduction, I know probably a lot of you might be in Minnesota right now. So I am from the Midwest. I grew up in Northern Illinois. I went to school in Stevens Point for my undergrad degree. I did some seasonal migrating in Yellowstone after I graduated from Stevens Point for probably about 7 years or so, 6 or 7 years. I did tons and tons of field work in all sorts of conditions with wolves, birds, did a little bit of cougar work, a little bit of elk work, tracked animals from the air and ground, watched wolves, as many of you probably have done in Yellowstone, for many, many hours sitting on some snowy hills, tracked out carnivores, did tons and tons of necropsies on ungulates and wolves. And being in Yellowstone and being surrounded by pretty amazing wolf research really kind of got my gears going. And I wanted to get more to analyzing data and writing and asking my own research questions. So that led me to the University of Montana, where, as Grant just said, I'm so close to finishing my PhD, but this opportunity with Colorado Parks and Wildlife was popped up last year, and I started in Colorado in October and just didn't quite finish, so I'm working on finishing now. But what I want to talk to you about today is the journey that Colorado's been on with restoring wolves. And it's restoring a sustainable wolf population in Colorado. It's not unlike the journey that wolves have made to naturally get to the state. It's one filled with determination and tenacity, trying to find a balance. And, there's incredible discoveries and maybe some conflict, but with a, really big desire to move forward and coexist. And this journey starts a lot further back than the 2020 ballot initiative to reintroduce wolves to Colorado. This group is very familiar with wolves, their history in the US, but there are a few things that I want to highlight specifically. Wolves were eradicated from Colorado in the 1940s after being systematically poisoned and trapped and shot during the westward expansion of people in the U.S. And the government programs and those initiatives were at their height in to get rid of wolves and other carnivores in the 1920s and 1930s, but it took until the 1940s in Colorado specifically for the last wolf to be seen and removed. But about 30 years later, the Endangered Species Act was signed into law, and wolves were one of the first species listed just 1 year after. And just a few years after that, in late 70s, early 80s, there was a discussion and debate about bringing wolves back to Colorado, even though that didn't happen at that point, and the Yellowstone and Idaho restoration efforts are a lot more widely known. So even though the restoration effort didn't happen at that point, wolves have made it to Colorado here and there. Since 2004, there have been 7 known wolves that have made it to Colorado. Most of them were killed somehow, being hit by a car or presumed poisoned or accidentally killed by people thinking they're coyotes. And those were, I think, 2004, 7, 09, and then 2 wolves in 2015. But then in 2019, a wolf came, and then another wolf, presumably shortly after that, and those 2 stayed. So this is a photo of this black wolf with a collar that was sent to Colorado Parks and Wildlife. And I'm going to say CPW for Colorado Parks and Wildlife, just because it's a bit of a mouthful over and over. This photo was sent in 2019, and it spurred a whole lot of questions. A lot of the sightings and photos that were sent, and that most places are sent, are coyotes or big fluffy dogs, or they're so far away and they're so tough to see. But this is a pretty incredible photo that's very clearly a wolf, very clearly collared. And it was eventually found that this wolf came from the greater Yellowstone ecosystem and had a number already. This is wolf 1084. She was seen several months later with then a gray male, and then those 2 actually denned in Colorado in 2020, and they were the first known wolf den to be in the state for almost 80 years. They ended up having 6 pups, one of which is still alive in Colorado, along with his father, 1084's mate. 1084 has not been seen in several years, so she's likely not alive anymore, but her mate and one of her offspring, a male, are both still alive in Colorado. So these wolves got to an area that's a little bit different than some other states that have wolf populations. Not only is Colorado really, really rugged, there are a lot of people in Colorado. There's 6 million residents. There's a lot of tourists that are recreating in the mountains, more similar to somewhere, like Washington than, the Northern Rockies or the Midwest. And I just can't emphasize the degree of recreation that's happening in Colorado's mountains. Colorado also has almost double the amount of elk than any other state. I was pretty shocked actually when I saw how many elk were in Colorado. In 2023, there were over 280,000, which does include the largest elk herd in the world, the White River elk herd, and that's almost 40,000 elk just in that one herd. For comparison, some states in the Northern Rockies have about 150,000 elk in the state. But beyond elk, there are really robust populations of other ungulates or hoofed animals like moose and deer and sheep. There are also lots of mountain lions and black bears, coyotes. There's also a recovered lynx population. I think 150 or 200 is the latest estimate. There are none collared, and there's actually soon to be wolverines in the next several years, which the Colorado legislature just approved a reintroduction plan of. So many of you are likely aware that the wolf restoration in Colorado was precipitated by a vote in 2020. Several organizations gathered tons and tons of signatures to get this proposition onto the ballot to reintroduce wolves in Colorado, and it ultimately did pass. This was the first time that people had the opportunity to vote on a wolf reintroduction, and it's the first time that a state and not the federal government was in charge of reintroducing wolves somewhere. So this is an incredible simplification of the entire process, but the ballot initiative passed in November of 2020, and that spurred a whole planning process of several years. This included stakeholder meetings, technical advising meetings, and culminated in a restoration management plan that was approved by the CPW Commission last year in May of 2023. And I want to highlight these two working groups. And throughout this process, there were tons of meetings, tons of coordination, but these two groups in particular were really incredibly important. And the first is this technical working group. It was made up of experts of wolf ecology, wolf reintroduction from many different agencies and groups. This working group, they made recommendations on how the process of restoring wolves to Colorado would actually happen. And after that happened, how to manage things like conflict. And those recommendations were included in that approved restoration plan. The second group was the stakeholder advisory group, and that was made up of some of Colorado's county commissioners, ranchers, outfitters in Colorado, tribal wildlife leaders, and nonprofit groups, among others. And this group also proposed some considerations to be included in that restoration plan. And all of those years of planning culminated in the first translocation of wolves at the end of 2023, just not even a year ago. And this whole initiative signifies just a really pivotal moment for Colorado's ecology and wildlife conservation in the region. So for the first year of translocations at the end of 2023, we were in Eastern Oregon, where wolves are not listed as endangered. They are listed as endangered in the western, about 2/3 of the state, that blue dotted line. There were some limitations to which wolves we could take from Oregon. Research has shown that anthropogenic removal of the breeding pair of wolves has a higher impact on the pack than by increasing the chance that that pack either dissolves or doesn't breed the next year. And since Oregon is also trying to increase its wolf population by not taking those breeding wolves, we hopefully had the smallest impact we could on their social structure. So the translocation process had 3 steps. So we first caught the wolves with a helicopter team and collared them, gave them veterinary exams. We held them overnight, and then the next morning they were flown to Colorado. So we caught wolves in the winter by helicopter instead of trapping in the summer. Each state and region does it a little bit differently. We had an incredibly successful first day. We caught 5 wolves on that first day, and we were done within the week, which I think surprised everybody a little bit, that we had a full plane load of wolves to send that day 1. Each wolf got a GPS collar and a really thorough veterinary exam. We had a really long list of health needs that we had to look at. Things down to making sure that wolves had functioning canines and eyes, all sorts of other things, making sure that they were healthy. And then they each got hydrating fluids, vaccines, and then they were placed into aluminum crates for the night. The only sedatives the wolves got were the original immobilizing drugs. So after that, they were awake in their crates overnight. They were covered in canvas to minimize light and sound and put somewhere very, very quiet and controlled. And they were incredibly calm within their crates. We had put ice blocks in there so that they had access to water. They're chewing on the ice blocks, kind of batting them around a little bit. We even had one wolf howl, but her neighbor, who was an unrelated male, just did not respond to her. Their flight to Colorado, it was a early wake-up call for everyone to have the wolves get going to Colorado in the early morning. They were loaded onto this small Pilatus plane from the organization Lighthawk Aviation. It's a nonprofit that does many conservation flights. You might recognize their name from things like moving Mexican wolves for captive breeding programs throughout the country, or I know that they have been doing some work with, I'm not sure the type of falcon, but flying them down to, I believe, Belize for reintroduction there. The wolves on the flight were also very calm. You know, they're awake, but it was pretty incredible to know that they were quiet and calm in those aluminum crates. Oh gosh. Um, Even though wolves were nice and calm throughout the process, I'm sure they were pretty ready to get away from humans when the crate doors opened. The wolves that we caught from packs together were released at the same time and in the same place. It took just a couple moments to leave, but all in all, it was a fairly quick process. There were, several people there, like the governor of Colorado, the director of the Department of Natural Resources and Colorado Parks and Wildlife, that got to be a part of releasing wolves into Colorado this first year. So in total, we caught the 10 wolves we were allotted from Oregon to translocate to Colorado. But also several more that got Oregon collars and stayed there. All of the wolves that we brought had GPS collars, as I said. Although we have had 2 collars fail on us, we caught 6 females and 4 males, which was just a perfect split because we already had 2 males within the state of Colorado. So we ended up with a split of 6 and 6, which was perfect. And we also caught, or of the 10 wolves we got, 7 of them were yearlings. But because we caught them in December, they're actually about 1.7 years old. So they're just about to turn 2. And the remaining 3, they were just about to turn 3 years old. But we did consider them 2-year-olds because they hadn't quite hit their April birthdays. But how are they doing now? I think that's kind of the most interesting part that people are tuning in to hear about. Wolves have been exploring the state of Colorado. They've been meeting the 2 males who have lived here for several years, and they're really settling into their new area. Wolves can travel incredible distances. There have been dispersals of up to 500 miles, but we've actually seen less long distance movements than I would anticipate, which does kind of signify, at least casually to me, that they were released in a pretty good spot. So we caught those 10 wolves in Colorado, but I've mentioned that we had 2 that were already here. And, I always want to preface, there's always a chance that there are uncolored wolves out there. Wolves have made it to Colorado before. There's nothing to say that they can't do that again, and they won't do that again. But right now we have 11 known wolves in Colorado. We have the 6 females that we translocated, and we have 5 males now. And unfortunately, we had those two failed collars, but luckily those wolves have been traveling with other wolves, so we've been able to keep tabs on them, even though they don't have the GPS function anymore. We have had two wolf mortalities this year. One of them was one of the translocated wolves, a young male. He was actually killed by a mountain lion in north central Colorado, which is not something that I had seen personally before, but in places like Washington, they have been seeing that a bit more. And speculating a little bit, a wolf without a pack that's wandering around on its own is a lot more susceptible to being killed by another predator like a mountain lion. So we assume that's kind of what happened. And you might be asking, wait a minute, that adds up to the 10 translocated wolves and then the two that was already there. How could you have another mortality? We actually had a wolf that we first heard about was already deceased in an area southeast of Denver. And this wolf was actually from the Great Lakes. You might have seen news articles on it at this point. But there was a sighting of a wolf in Nebraska in March, so it may have been this wolf making its way to the west, but ultimately, unfortunately, found its demise in Colorado. There have been several depredations, which we're prepared for. There have been 12 incidents over 3 counties in Colorado in 2024. And these mostly have been centered around calving of cows when there are these, really small, vulnerable calves on the landscape. And CPW is trying really hard to get materials to people and support them as we shift to this kind of new normal of having wolves on the landscape. And I'll get into detail about what those materials actually look like and what they actually are in just a few moments. On a pretty exciting note, I think for 2024, we actually have our first wolf pack that includes the translocated wolves. We have had one den this year of 2 translocated wolves, a male and a female. We had suspicions of that there was a den when the female's collar stopped uploading regularly in mid-April, and that's often the first indication of a female denning since she's underground, and the collar can't connect to the satellites to transmit locations. So we knew that she was still around, and area biologist was still getting good signals from her in kind of the same spot. So we knew she was there, and we just kind of had to be patient to have her spend a little bit more time above ground and have her GPS collar upload some points and realize she's going back to the same spot. This is very exciting. So they have since moved from their first den, their natal den, to a rendezvous site. And a couple weeks ago in June, we did get a really quick look at one pup, and we really hope that there are others out there. This first pack is named the Copper Creek Pack, because that's a significant landmark in their territory. So something that's always on people's minds with wolves is how do we minimize conflict with people, mostly people who own livestock or pets and live in more rural areas. Our goal is to minimize the conflict, even though we know it'll take a lot of effort and communication sometimes. Wolves are really intelligent creatures who learn how to exist on a landscape with people and livestock, but that also means that because they're intelligent and adaptable and generalists, that some of these strategies that we want to use to disturb them or from being in an area, they can learn that they're not very scary if those strategies are overused. I just want to note that I mentioned that there's a lot of recreation in Colorado. The chances of a wolf being aggressive or dangerous to a human is very, very low. In Colorado specifically, and probably Minnesota, someone is way more likely to be chased or injured by something like a moose than a wolf. The bigger risk of wolves and recreationalists coming in contact with each other is people accidentally bumping wolves at home sites, not knowing they're there, or leaving trash, leaving food that wolves can ingest and then get used to human foods, which is something that we want to avoid. What is more realistic is the conflict of wolves and livestock. And in places that wolves and livestock overlapped, there will be some sort of conflict, but we're trying to reduce those by using many at one time and not just one type of strategy. And I have a figure we'll go through in a minute. But I want to talk about compensation because CPW has a really extensive compensation program that producers are eligible for if they're, unfortunate enough to have a loss due to a wolf. And it covers not only the, classic livestock that we think about, like cattle and sheep, but it also covers working dogs, like herding dogs, guardian dogs, things like yaks and newly bison, just a lot of goats. I think there's a long list of what's actually considered livestock in Colorado. So we think of depredation as this direct loss, meaning some sort of animal that is killed by a wolf, some sort of domestic animal that's killed by a wolf. And if that happens, producers are eligible for fair market value of each animal, and that's up to $15,000 per animal that's lost. Also, if an animal is injured by a wolf, producers are eligible for up to $15,000 of veterinary bills if that animal needs care to recover. There's other forms of loss that are considered in Colorado that were really interesting to me when I first heard about them. And there's this idea of indirect loss, meaning maybe an animal wasn't killed, but it's missing, or there's some sort of effect from wolves, like maybe weight is decreased or there's decreased conception rates. This gets a little bit complicated, but imagine a producer has cattle out on open range where it's really tough to go out and see if an animal was killed by a wolf in a timely manner. Producers have two different options in that case. There's this idea of basic compensation where a producer is missing animals when they go check on them, and they can be compensated for those missing sheep or calves or whatever livestock if they've had some sort of issue with wolves before. But then there's this kind of different new thing to me, at least, called it's the title itemized production loss doesn't give you a lot of information, but it has that same idea, the compensation for if an animal is missing and there have been wolf issues before, but it also has these indirect losses, like are weaning weights of calves lower? Are there decreased conception rates? Things like that if a producer has some history of what those look like and they have some sort of issue going on with wolves, they can apply for compensation in those differences. But we all know that being proactive is the best way. The best solution is to try and prevent as much conflict as we possibly can. CPW, Colorado Parks and Wildlife, has put a lot of effort and resources and personnel into creating a really robust conflict minimization program. It's usually great to have several things employed at once. The agency provides free of charge a ton of different resources for people to do things like haze wolves away, like cracker shells, rubber bullets, things like fox lights to put on a fence post and have a blinking light at random times to mimic human presence, to try and scare wolves away from a certain area. CPW and the Colorado Department of Ag are cooperating to help organize things like range riders. There's one deployed at the moment. And one really interesting and big resource provided by CPW is fladry. And fladry is in this photo, these kind of flapping red flags. They're supposed to be pretty spooky to wolves who are suspicious of new things like that. By creating this visual barrier that's moving in the wind, and if a wolf or another carnivore gets bold enough to go up to the fladry and kind of check it out, doesn't seem as spooky anymore. It's often electrified, so the animal gets shocked on the nose or on the paw. And learns that lesson that the fladry is not to be approached. Oh gosh. In the last 2 years that CPW has helped deploy fladries for and with producers, there hasn't been a single animal lost in those areas where fladry is, and it's usually in a smaller area like a calving pasture. But not having a loss for 2 years in these areas is pretty impressive. So this figure kind of gives an overview of some of the things that we've talked about already, but some things that we haven't. And this isn't even an exhaustive list. We touched on fladry, those kind of a scare tactic, those spooky red flapping flags. That the thing labeled scare devices, that's supposed to be a light, a fox light that's blinking at those intermittent times. Scare devices also, I think the name is a critter getter. It's kind of like a trail cam, but instead of taking a photo when an animal walks in front of it and the piece of technology detects movement, it makes a really, really loud, horrible noise, and it's also meant to scare animals away. In this figure, you'll see livestock guardian dogs, which are something that a lot of producers in Colorado are trying out. Great different ways of grazing, herd composition, range riders, avoiding high-risk landscapes where maybe an elk calving ground, maybe choosing not to put cattle on as elk are calving in the area. One really big strategy that's been proven really successful in other areas is carcass management. And that makes a lot of sense to me. Having, maybe a calf or young cow dies, not keeping that carcass on the landscape is really helpful. And getting rid of that attractant, not just for wolves, but for bears, for coyotes, for other carnivores coming in and scavenging on that carcass. Just removing that idea entirely is very helpful. I do want to mention, some of you might be familiar with this thing we call a 10J rule. Some of you, it might be the first time you're hearing it, but it comes up a lot in Colorado. Like other reintroduction projects, Colorado has this 10J rule, and it's called the 10J rule because that's the label it has in the Endangered Species Act. But essentially it means that the wolves in Colorado are treated as an experimental population. This is the exact same thing that happened with the Yellowstone and Idaho reintroductions. This lets producers and agencies haze wolves, try and get them out of the area, and even lethally remove them if necessary, if they're caught in the act attacking livestock or a working dog, or if they're considered to be chronically depredating. And this, it gives a lot more flexibility for managing an endangered species. And it has been a part of every wolf reintroduction process, at least in the Western United States. So Colorado has all these programs in place. Our conflict program is up and running. The 10J rule has designated Colorado's population of wolves as experimental. Wolves have been translocated, but what's next? This is just the first little bit of this process. First of all, we have several more years of translocations to do. The goal is to get 10 to 15 wolves per year over the next about 2 to 4 years or so. And it is really, it's best to get wolves from several different locations to increase genetic diversity. Having a really genetically diverse founding population will be best for the long-term viability of wolves in Colorado. And after these next couple of years of translocations, we'll reassess if any other translocations are needed, how the population is doing, if they're reproducing naturally, and the survival of all the wolves, both translocated and born in Colorado. There's also a lot of research projects that are gearing up. CPW has a really robust research team that partners with, both internal folks, external agencies, universities. There are a few projects that are getting started looking at the effects of wolves on elk, on vegetation, and livestock. We're also gearing up some projects about the wolves themselves, things like the expansion throughout Colorado, how they're using the landscape, where they choose to go, where they choose to not go, and their social behavior. I mean, these are wolves that are meeting each other and forming packs in a really interesting way. It's a pretty incredible opportunity, and the list of topics grows day by day by day. That would be exciting to look at. So monitoring wolves, my title is the Wolf Monitoring and Data Coordinator. This is really my main focus in Colorado, with biologists and tons of other people throughout the state. We are keeping track of wolves as they recolonize Colorado, as they reproduce, as they create new packs. An annual minimum count of wolves sounds like a very simple task, but it's actually really complex. Wolves are these really social, elusive carnivores. They're notoriously difficult to count accurately in large areas like a state. Each state, each region does it a little bit differently depending on what their landscape looks like, how accessible some of these places are. So we have some exciting ideas in Colorado to see how we're doing that, but we're keeping really close tabs on them and their numbers, because wolves are federally endangered in Colorado as well as state endangered. So we're in this phase 1 of wolf recovery where wolves are considered endangered. And the way that we move from wolves being endangered to threatened and then delisted in the state has to do with that minimum count. So to move to the next phase in Colorado where wolves would be threatened, we have to have at least 50 wolves for the next, we have to have 50 wolves for 4 years in a row. So 4 consecutive years with 50 wolves. So we have to have that really accurate minimum count. And then after that, to move into a third phase, we have to have either 200 wolves total in the state, or we have to have at least 150 wolves in 2 consecutive years. So lots of numbers thrown at you, but this is really kind of the way that wolves move to being delisted in Colorado. However, this is a totally separate process than wolves being delisted federally. So these numbers do not have to do with the federal delisting process of wolves in the United States or in the Western US. There is so much to talk about with Colorado wolves. I could probably talk to all of you for hours and hours and not cover everything, but there's a lot of places to keep informed. The Colorado Parks and Wildlife website is great. It has tons of information on it. There's tons of frequently asked questions, updates. You can sign up for a wolf specific newsletter that comes out every couple weeks usually. You'll find our monthly activity maps, which I'll show you on the next slide, our latest one, to see where wolves have been in the last month. There's updates on big news that also go out on social media fairly regularly. On the website, there's specific resources for K through 12 educators. So there's a lot of information out there. But if you happen to be in Colorado, your local office can also direct your questions to whoever best to answer them, which is sometimes me, but more often someone else. A quick note on the public maps. This is a map that you're seeing now that goes out every single month, the third Wednesday, I think, of every month. So this last one was out on the end of June. We're coming up to another one, I think this coming week. So this looks like a big purple blob. And hopefully on your screens, you can see that there are some darker purple lines within this larger purple polygon. So each one of those little purple sections is a watershed. We use GPS points to make these maps. So those little purple blobs that make up the big one, if there was one GPS point in that watershed last month, then it will show up as purple in this public map. So that does mean that a watershed could have 1 point in it, or it could have 100 points in it. The map does treat them the same. But a couple interesting things to highlight on this latest map. I was looking at all the ones from this year, and wolves haven't gone almost anywhere that they haven't been already. And you'll notice that the I-70 corridor, that red line that goes east to west, I don't know how many of you have driven it, but wow, is it really busy. That is a tough barrier for not only wolves, but animals to cross. Some of the watersheds do span that interstate, but wolves have not made it south of I-70 as far as we know that. And that is noted on our website. So this is something that's, I think, really interesting that people have been liking, and you can find out on our website. And if you sign up for that newsletter about wolf news. There are so many people involved in helping restore wolves to Colorado. It is absolutely incredible. There are biologists, wildlife managers, pilots, conflict specialists, admin personnel, agency leadership, and so many people that I haven't mentioned. I've met so many people involved in wolf restoration in just the, 9 or 10 months that I've been in the state. The restoration effort, it's going to be buoyed by conversations at your local cafe, shows of tolerance and support in respectful discussions, and understanding that people might have differing opinions on the restoration of wolves to Colorado, but we all want an ecosystem to be as healthy and as complete as it possibly can be. And with that, I can take any questions. I believe this video doesn't have any sound or anything, so I can just keep it up if we have questions. These are just snippets of the release and capture of the translocation this year, and it's pretty incredible to reflect back on this point. So Krista, up to you. We can watch it, but I definitely want to get to questions.
Yeah, fantastic. Brenna, thank you so much. That was amazing, and it is super cool to watch this video. Thank you for sharing this. Um, so we do have some questions. So I think I forgot to mention this earlier that if you have a question, please feel free to type it in on the Q&A tab. So you can just click on that on the bottom of your screen and then type in that question, and I will ask it to Brenna for her to answer for us live, as I'm very distracted by this super cool video. But one of the questions related specifically to the wolves that we're watching head off into their new home and their new adventure. How many packs were sourced for those original 10?
I'm gonna look in the corner. I believe, because I have it written on my whiteboard. I believe it's 5. There were a couple wolves that were pack mates. We even got 4 wolves from one pack on several separate days. There was a wolf that was not associated with any pack. It seemed to be dispersing from wherever it came from. So I believe it was at least 4. I believe it was 4 packs and then 1 wolf that was not associated with any pack.
Great. And you talked a bit about the working towards coexistence and ways to kind of mitigate some of that conflict and some of the depredation that may happen with wolves. And is there work kind of being specifically done to provide education and talk to the hunters and ranchers about their concerns for depredation and that conflict on their land and with their livestock?
Absolutely. Yeah, there have been tons and tons of not only conversations, but just one-on-one conversations, but formalized conversations. There is a group that has been put together that is meeting, I'm not sure how often, but they're in the process of talking about what does chronic depredation mean? What do things like that actually mean? That's comprised of people from stalkers associations, ranchers, people from universities, people from nonprofits. There have been, I can't even list how many conversations there have been with and around conflict. It is probably the most talked about topic that we have in CPW right now surrounding wolves. There's a lot of conversations happening I say on the ground, that's not quite what I mean, but individual to individual, officers and biologists in the field, talking to producers, talking to ranchers, one-on-one. So there's been a lot of information out there. As far as actual tangible items, CPW is supplying a lot of tangible items like that fladry, like cracker shells, for hazing wolves away from areas with livestock, rubber bullets to haze wolves away from livestock, things like that. So there's a lot of conversations and actual tangible items out there.
Yeah, fantastic. There's a lot of work in the education and supplies around that. Have you or the team done any work with some of the indigenous populations that are in Colorado and on these lands where the wolves were reintroduced on?
So I mentioned one of those working groups. Believe the stakeholder advisory group. I can't remember his exact title. I think he was interim director of natural resources. And his actual title now is something very similar. One of the leaders of the wildlife research and management for the Southern Ute tribe was on the stakeholder advisory group. The couple of reservations in Colorado are very, very far away from the release of wolves. We release wolves in kind of north central Colorado. The only reservations are in the southwest corner, but we've had a ton of conversations with them And we continue to talk with them about if or when wolves get to that area. It'll be a long time, but it may happen.
Right. And do you think there will be any initiatives that might create wildlife corridors to kind of minimize that physical barrier of I-70?
Yeah, so there's actually a ton of work being done already, trying to minimize that barrier of I-70 because it is significant. Um, I just recently was looking at the same thing, just learning about Colorado, learning about habitat connectivity here. And there are actually quite a few underpasses uh, that are under I-70, and some of them are really large. They're these like big valleys that go under I-70 that are not very noticeable driving on it. And then there's one or two, they're not necessarily wildlife bridges or overpasses like you might see in areas, but the Coloradans that are on this call are gonna skewer me because I can't remember the ski area that goes over the pass. I think it's Loveland ski area goes over I-70, over Eisenhower Tunnel. And I remember the first time I drove under it last year, I thought, wow, that is a really good overpass, even though it's not specifically meant to be so. So there actually are some corridors already, and CPW, along with the Colorado Department of Transportation, have been doing a ton of work to try to connect the northern third of Colorado and the southern two thirds. I think all day tomorrow I'm in a workshop with CPW and the Department of Transportation talking about wildlife connectivity. So tons and tons of work is being done for habitat connectivity, specifically in that corridor, but also in other corridors in Colorado. There are some really amazing overpasses that have been built in the last several years on other highways. So there's a ton of work being done. It is a significant highway.
Yeah, that's fantastic. There's so much work being done to help with those connections. Going back a little bit to the potential for conflict, what is the process, or maybe even just how hard is it for producers and livestock owners to submit the claims and work towards the kind of reimbursement, the compensation for depredation?
Yeah, so there is a specific packet that producers get. Say someone goes out one morning and they find a calf that they think, this might have been killed by a wolf. What they do is they call their local officer, their local game warden, and they say, hey, I have this suspicion. Can you come out, investigate it, see what you think? That game warden then tells them what they think and gives them this packet of information of here's exactly how you submit a claim to get money, basically get your compensation for this animal if a wolf killed it. And I don't know if we have information of how long that actually takes. This is a little bit out of my realm because I'm not in the conflict world in Colorado. But I think they have to figure out what fair market value is for that animal, fill out their paperwork, get the report from the game warden, and submit that information.
Sure. And this question is from Lisa. Lisa, if I get this totally wrong, please type it in again and we'll try to straighten out what I'm saying. And also, Brenna, this might be for the conflict people, but Lisa's asking if the producers are compensated for the conflict management. And I'm not quite sure if Lisa is referring to if they're getting like the flattery at no cost or if they are getting compensated if they lose livestock while using something like flattery.
Yeah, I can try and answer both, just to cover bases. If a producer is using these conflict management techniques or minimization techniques like fladry or cracker shells or something like that, and they do end up losing livestock, they still get compensated, absolutely. And if I'm trying to remember, oh yeah, so kind of maybe the other way that was answered or asked, they're not getting compensated necessarily for, they're not getting extra money for using some of these techniques, but they are getting, some of these materials for free, if that might be the question. And even things like fladry. Fladry does take a lot of work to make sure that it's up and running. Electric fences are not foolproof. So if an elk comes by and knocks down part of the fence, you still have to maintain the fence. And that we have a really great conflict coordinator who has been doing a lot of on the ground work with trying to help people with that maintenance. So hopefully I answered one of the questions that you asked.
I think so. So Lisa, if we didn't, just let us know and I will re-ask that. But we have another one about that. Someone had read that the pups that were born there were to a bonded pair. However, they're wondering with further information if there were additional dominant pairs that had settled since the introduction and or multiple wolves bonding and hunting as a pack. So what kind of pack activity have you seen in the tracking, I think is what she's asking.
Yeah, good question. So we have seen wolves meet each other and associate for, days or weeks at a time and then split off. But the most kind of consistent wolves that we've seen together are the two wolves that had the pups. Once they met each other in January or so, they were stuck to each other like glue. And wolf breeding season in February, they must have been together then. They have been together seemingly ever since. So that is probably the pair that you're talking about. They are together still at this point, as far as we know, raising, however many pups they do have. So that's probably the pair that you're talking about. But at this point, we've had, wolves associate with each other, learn about who else is on the landscape, and then maybe go off and do their own thing, come back together, travel together for a little bit, do their own thing. They're really in this kind of exploratory phase, trying to figure out who's out there.
Sure. Do you anticipate that wolf watching becomes kind of a tourist thing in Colorado?
I would compare Colorado to other states. We see the phenomenon really of wolf watching in places like national parks, like Yellowstone, like Denali, places like that, but we don't see that necessarily in somewhere like Montana or Washington or California, or the Midwest, like Wisconsin or Minnesota. We just don't see that quite as often. Thinking about Colorado, gosh, they are big landscapes. They're treed landscapes. People will see wolves in Colorado. People have seen wolves in Colorado. I would have a hard time believing that the wolf watching phenomenon like that happens in national parks would happen in a state here. Especially remember we've got 11 wolves that we know about. There's 1,000 or so in some of these other states, and it's still not quite like that. Even in places where wolves are still listed as endangered. So I do doubt it.
Yeah, the landscape being so big, and then you add in the trees, it's, like in northern Minnesota, people see them occasionally, but as far as it being kind of a Yellowstone-like experience, that's a little bit more challenging.
Absolutely. Yeah, places like Yellowstone, they're very, very special for being able to see wolves, know individuals, see behavior. Yeah, it would be tough to do that somewhere else.
Yeah, they set the bar really high for the rest of us.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And have you In the conversations with the ranchers, have you had any experience with ranchers that have just really not wanted to implement coexistence measures, and or in continued conversations change their minds and decide to use them?
It's a good question. I'm probably not the best person for it because it's not my, area of expertise. I'm less involved in kind of the conflict area, but I can say that people, when they see something work, like when they see something like Fladry work for, their neighbor or their neighbor in the next county or something like that, they're probably a little bit more open to using it. So I don't have specific information, unfortunately, just because I'm not really involved in those conversations. But I do imagine that sentiment is out there somewhere.
For sure. And I think we'll wrap it up with this last question. Have you heard from other regions of the US that are asking basically about kind of the lessons that you've learned and using this as another approach for introducing wolves in other areas? This particular one is questioning the Northeast specifically, but in other areas.
Good question. I mean, I haven't specifically heard anything or conversations about, Northeast wolf introduction or anything like that, but you know, I think always with an effort like this, people are talking. We talk to our counterparts in the other Western states and our counterparts other places that are studying wolves or have wolf populations that are either established or just establishing or just starting out. We're all learning lessons throughout this, and I would even want to expand it a little bit beyond wolves because there are all sorts of efforts being made to restore other carnivore populations throughout the US and beyond that I think can take, some lessons or just look at Colorado and see what they like about what's happening and maybe what they don't. So hopefully that this effort has been useful to other people kind of on their own restoration journey with whatever species they're looking at.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, Brenna, thank you so much for a really wonderful and informative webinar. And thank you to everyone who joined us. There's quite a few comments saying this was a great presentation and thank you so much. So everyone, I hope you have a great night. Everyone is surviving the heat and humidity and dry heat wherever you are. So have a great night and thank you.
All right, thanks everyone.
Bye.